Saint Brigid died in 525 AD, and her body was enshrined at Kildare, and her shrine became a place of pilgrimage for Irish Catholics. The Vikings began raiding Ireland in the early 800s. They raided Kildare in 831 AD, and before they got there, Brigid's remains had been removed. They were brought to Downpatrick Cathedral, and they were buried there along with St. Columba and St. Patrick. They were put in unmarked graves. The monks who buried these saints did not want the Vikings to know where they were buried. So they were put in unmarked graves, and unfortunately the location of these graves was lost, either because the monks who knew of the location were killed by the Vikings, or were carried off by the Vikings, or fled and just never came back to the area. Now the people at Downpatrick knew that these bodies were somewhere, but they didn't know exactly where. And they remained lost for 400 years. And the story is that one night the bishop at Downpatrick Cathedral was alone in the church in the dark praying, and he prayed to God that God would give him some sign showing him where the saints had been buried. And when this bishop looked up from his prayers, there was a light beam going through the church and ending on lighting up a spot on the floor of the church. So the bishop had this spot dug up, and there were 3 coffins. In the middle was Patrick, and on Patrick's sides were Brigid and Columba. The bishop then, with the help of the Pope and with some of the wealthier people of the area, built a shrine for Patrick, Columba, and St. Brigid. And it stayed there until a man named Lord Grey, who was the deputy in Ireland under Henry VIII, until he destroyed the shrines. Now, before the shrines were destroyed, Brigid's remains were transported to the continent, to Europe. And eventually her skull came into the possession of the Emperor of Austria. And the emperor gave the skull to a Spanish clergyman who was in Austria. And this clergyman brought the skull back to Spain, and from there it was given to a Jesuit order in Lisbon, Portugal, where the skull remains today. If you have an interest in the Irish Church or in St. Brigid herself, please check out my book, St. Brigid, The Celts in the Early Irish Church. It's available now on Amazon.com.